Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are excited that so many of you could join us this evening for On Cultivating Connection. I'm Jason MacArthur, the events coordinator for the Public Programs Department of the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Christine Brooks and Hannah Paasch, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Christine Brooks is a professor in the Expressive Arts Therapy program at CIIS. She is a coach and educator with over 20 years experience integrating creativity and self-awareness practices into her own work and in supporting the work of others. She co-founded the Science of Friendship Project in 2012 because she believes that our capacities for interaction and connection are our greatest commodities. Hannah Paasch is a blogger whose Twitter thread, #Millenniagram, went viral in December 2017. She's also credited with starting the #Church2 movement, drawing attention to sexual misconduct within places of worship. She has been featured in Jezebel, Religion and Politics, Bustle, Teen Vogue, Time, Mother Jones, and has written for the Huffington Post. And now, let me turn it over to Christine and Hannah.
Hello.
Hello, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be.
Hello there.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, Hannah. Welcome. It is so great to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here virtually.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I came across you on Instagram like so many people have. And I know that you've been in conversation at CIIS before, and you and I share a deep and abiding love for the enneagram. So it is really exciting to be with you tonight and to talk about connection and right? It's a whole different ballgame now.
It really is.
Yeah. And we started sort of conceptualizing this, several weeks ago when it was about like the pandemic, and now culture is shifting again so radically and rapidly, and here we are, and there's so much going on in the world. And so just kind of naming that as our starting place of there's a lot of complexity informing how this conversation probably will unfold tonight.
And absolutely.
Yeah. And so I thought maybe we could just kick off with your vision or how you live connection a little bit. Talk about what this has meant for you over time, and also from this sort of new starting point that we're living into right now.
Yeah. So it's been a whiplash time. I was in quarantine for a number of weeks and then went straight from quarantine to community organizing and protesting. So I feel like connection for me is evolving in real time. I have been a child of the internet for most of my adult life. I joined Twitter when I was 19 or 20, when it was first beginning, like a decade ago, and really have made almost all of my connections through that one website. And as someone who was very sheltered and a very fundamentalist kind of upbringing, for me, the internet has been a space to be exposed to ideas and experiences that I would never have had access to before. Mm-hmm. So for me, when people talk about the evils of the internet, I'm like, the internet means access to me. The internet means that I am able to learn from Black womanist scholars. The internet means that I'm able to interact with other queer folks and find out more about my own identity because of that. But I do think that during quarantine, I realized that there was almost, for me, as an empath, a little bit of a connection overload because it was all digital. Mm-hmm. So I had so many unread text messages, which I'm known for being great at responding to anyway. And, just notifications and direct messages and Zoom calls. There have been so many different ways to connect with people. And so I realized, okay, even though I'm not out in the world doing things, I'm going to have to be more intentional about how I center myself, get connected with true self for me, and then, you know, be able to reach out from that space. Like pre-pandemic, it seemed very easy to kind of balance IRL and URL lifestyles, and that hasn't really been a thing. But now, kind of getting back to work, one of my many jobs is as an essential worker, as a barista. And so I went back to work, and I realized just how much I take for granted those in-person connection moments. Because when you see someone every day, you don't think twice about it. You don't think to ask intentionally about that person's well-being. You know, you're kind of vibing, you're hanging out. And so I realized every person that I got to see once I left quarantine was really, it was a special moment every single time. Almost to an overwhelming extent, but it did make me feel like, okay, I have to be intentional about connecting with the people that I care about, regardless of whether or not I get the opportunity to see them in person. And then sort of as we've evolved into community organizing and returning to that work, for me, it has meant a lot of, obviously as a white person, a lot of listening, but also I've been exposed to anti-racism for many years now. It's not new to me. And so I feel a specific responsibility to engage with other white people who might be further behind in their study or their discovery of white supremacy than me. So there's lots of really exciting new connections that we can dig into, but that's sort of been my experience. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, you said so much, and I was listening and I was thinking, well, okay, I'm the generation before, so I'm a Gen X person, even though Millenniagram speaks to my heart so dearly.
Thank you.
You know, so I am not I'm not a child of the digital world.
Sure.
Although I was part of the first .com bubble and back in the 90s, back in the day. For me, online has also been a place where connection has always been a deep fascination. So the digital world hasn't seemed, like you said, you know, the evils of online life.
Right.
You know, it really does have its pitfalls, and there are times when I notice a hesitancy to connect via social media that I often wonder if people who are more millennial have a different take on in terms of their emotional state in the engagement process. I notice that sometimes I get caught up in the IRL versus URL debate and where I want to go with that. So just noticing that. And the reality of it is that I have been working remotely and essentially in online venues off and on for about 12 years now.
Wow.
And so this world feels a little bit like IRL for me in a lot of ways. And you mentioned being an empath, and I super resonate with that as well. And one of the things that I'm curious about, and I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time on, but maybe it can percolate a little bit in this conversation too, is that I've heard people throw out that it's really not possible to experience empathy in the virtual space. And I don't experience that at all. I experience really deep connection. I'm actually a coach and I work online. I work through
okay.
with my clients, and the bond there can be super strong. And we're going to talk a lot about the enneagram tonight. And of course, I immediately, being a type 4, and type 4s like to talk about their own personal experience, as you know. I wonder sometimes, is it just me? And I think that my clients who are not 4s, and I think that the people that I spend time with who are not 4s, I'd be really curious to hear what they have to say, but I have a feeling that they experience connection too.
Yeah.
Maybe in our conversation, we can kind of do this IRL, URL
Yeah.
toggle,
I would
because
love to.
I haven't gotten to be back out in the world quite as much as you have. I'm still
Sure.
in the pretty much quarantined stage.
Okay.
And I'm starving for that. I'm starving for being amongst humans in real life. And
Yeah.
noticing that hunger has gotten intensified. I spend most of my time in Florida now, and my city's opening right back up. Like,
Of course.
really happen. And but I'm not in that practice either. So
Sure.
it's a lot of conflicting feelings too. I mean, I imagine in my own experience, it's brought up a lot of conflicted feelings, the whole experience of quarantine. And I
Right.
imagine that's true for other people as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned something really interesting about the empath experience. I imagine, and this is just kind of me spitballing, but I imagine that those who maybe would not self-identify as empaths, maybe do struggle to connect empathically with others via the internet. I know for me, um, it is almost more that I experience an empathic connection with someone over the internet, because there's a certain calming nervous system when I'm face to face with somebody, where I'm this deluge of information all at once. Things are kind of happening in a conversation. We're going back and forth. But I'm finding on the internet, just reading about trauma constantly and having that just absolutely flooding my brain at all times. It almost feels like it hits me faster empathically than maybe it would in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's definitely an enneagram connection there. I don't think it's just fours. I know a lot of eights who would self-identify as empaths.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's there for twos as well. I think threes are maybe in denial about it.
We love you, threes.
Yeah, we love you so much. My partner is a 3. He's very lovely. I think nines, what I experience talking to nines a lot is that they are so empathically connected to what they experience on the internet that they literally shut it out, in a much more like self-defensive mode than maybe I would. Maybe I have something to learn from that. So I think that there are different numbers that I have seen interact online in similar patterns as one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the title of this talk is Cultivating Connection.
Yes.
In the science of friendship work that I've done, in terms of how that works professionally or in business arenas, I've talked about it as nurturing networks. And it kind of all feels very similar. But in terms of this cultivation part, have you found that your intentionality or your consciousness around being in connection or staying in connection has changed since we've gone into this new way of being in relationship with each other?
Yes, I think that for me, I have had to audit the ways that for me as a millennial, I don't put a lot of thought into who I immediately connect with. I follow people very quickly. If I sense that we have even some common interest, I make the connection, and then decide further on down if I want to continue a conversation with that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I've realized that perhaps one of the downsides to living online so much is that there are so many people that I would call friends, and yet we don't really check in on each other. We don't know the intimate details of one another's lives. If one of us was to take a break from one of the social media platforms that we are on a lot, maybe I don't hear about that person's life for a few months. And is that true friendship? it seems more like an acquaintance that I like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I've sort of had to audit what friendship means to me, and not in a way of, well, I think originally once I started to realize, wow, there's a disparity between who I consider a friend and how we actually interact with one another, how integrated we are into each other's lives. I'm having to pay attention to that, to notice that and realize, okay, I need to not be digitally enmeshed with people that I'm not actually in daily relationship with. And it's okay to have them as a contact. It's okay to talk to one another, to affirm one another, to be interested in one another's lives. But, maybe that's not someone that should be considered a close friend in my mind. I feel like I'm having to get a lot more detailed about how I'm organizing people in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's like your social relationship circles might have changed.
Yes.
Or like the inner circle is different than the circles going out a little
right.
bit. Uh-huh. Yeah. And there's so much research in friendship studies. Well, friendship is the least studied of all relationship dynamics. I don't know if you know that, but that
I heard you say that on your talk, and I was like, wow.
Yeah, I know. And part of it is that it's very hard to figure out how people make friends. It's not the same. There's like formulas to romantic connection, and kin connections are considered something different. But in the research, it's actually kind of hard to get down to the science of friendship, which is why it was such an interesting topic for me to kind of dive into. And I'm not a sociometrics kind of person, so I haven't been building algorithms around this. But some of what I do know is that those boundary lines between like the inner circle and then as we go out, the wider circles of what we would call, and this sounds so terrible, but sometimes we refer to them as weak links. I know, right? It sounds horrible. But what that just means is those are the people that aren't in your inner circle.
Sure.
And it sounds like you're kind of in that process of like
deciphering who that is.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if that has anything to do with there not being, for all of the other relationships, there are accepted cultural contracts that you make with one another. Like, we are deciding to be in relationship, whereas friendship is it's a much more fluid thing.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the people that maybe do share all of the same interests as me are not who I actually want to call when I'm having a bad day. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. And there's a way in which, well, more than 50% of people in the United States don't live in the place that they were born. And the migratory patterns of people are so overwhelming that the thing that keeps us connected is ongoing contact.
Yeah.
And so there's also like this way in which it seems like it's becoming more difficult to have that intentionality, to have unintentional connection.
Right.
Serendipity doesn't really exist anymore, especially in quarantine. It's not like you're bumping into someone in the grocery store, and if you are, you're in a mask and you're staying socially distant and you're saying, hey, I'll Zoom you later. Don't touch me, don't hug me, Right. And so it's like the way that we may have taken for granted how we connect, I think has had to pop much more firmly into consciousness in a way that means that we might have to think about the rules of engagement
a little bit more.
Yeah.
As someone who has studied the science of friendship, what do you, if you had to guess about how cultivating connection will look like for us going forward, do you see any new patterns forming?
Yeah, I do. I think that people are going to be scheduling contact in more formal ways. I just went back to sort of people with their calling cards in Victorian times who would come and bring their calling card and say, would you let, Miss so-and-so know that I have stop by. It was so formal before.
Yeah.
Then it went to this sort of informal, oh, hey, maybe we'll see each other. I'll catch you later. I'll bump into you.
Right.
I'll see you at a party. And we don't have those right now. And who knows when that will be part of our social fabric again. And so it seems to me, from what I'm noticing, that people are having to schedule calls. I know a community in Santa Cruz where I used to live, and the local hangout crew who always gathered at their favorite watering hole has started doing online connection at least once a week, because they don't bump into each other anymore. They don't have that opportunity. And so how do we have to maintain in some way. And so I think more and more of that on like the social level is probably going to be really necessary. And when you and I were kind of chatting earlier, we had both noticed or had made note of the fact that different Enneagram types may have different needs and requirements and styles around this too. What's your thought on that? Like this idea that your Enneagram core type may influence how, when, and with whom you want to cultivate connection.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me as a 4, I have, and this also might be due to, I was raised very nomadically. We never stayed in one place for long. And I noticed that I've carried some of those patterns into adulthood, both in positive and to my detriment in some ways. But I would say, for me as a 4, words of affirmation are really important to me. So I don't necessarily need to be on FaceTime with you for 5 hours. But I just receiving like thoughtful notes from my friends. I started just collecting little gifts from around the house and, sanitizing them and then dropping little bags in front of my houses, just because I wanted them to know that I was thinking of them. And, just receiving a thoughtful text to me means a lot, and it goes a long way towards feeling connected with somebody. But I'm also an introvert, so I don't need the hordes of time with someone that another type might need. I find, I have a partner I have 2 partners actually. I have a partner who's an 8 and a partner who's a 3. And they both experience connection very differently. The 8, she has been very, she has like connection, in-person connection is very important to her, but she also has this capacity to turn on, like, we're in go mode, we're in work mode, and that can wait. Like we don't have to do that right now. And then of course, I'm lucky to live in a house with a family, so we do get connection with one another almost too much, where we're like, just get me some space. I can't breathe in here. But I've noticed from my partner who's a 3, he doesn't really call his friends. He doesn't really connect with them in those kinds of ways. And so the not being able to go out and meet someone for drinks or having that scheduled experience is really hard for him. So we've done a couple social distancing things where we've had friends like come sit on the opposite side of an alley and we're sitting on the other side, and we both brought our own bottle of wine and we're just talking to one another from across the way. And it sounds so silly, but sometimes just being able to look at somebody and get that nonverbal communication is really key.
Right. Yeah. And I'm an extroverted 4.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So for me, I'm like, I need to go deep, as 4s do in conversation. Our conversational style tends to be, oh, let's dive in deep and just like go there.
Tell me everything.
Tell me everything. And I'll tell you everything.
Right.
And because I'm an extrovert, I want to do that as a process. So yeah, I could do that 5-hour FaceTime very comfortably. very comfortably. And yet I'm married to an introverted 6. It's a bit much. Like, it's too much.
Sure.
My introverted 6 wife wants space and likes a lot of downtime and will connect and wants to connect, but there's a way in which I'm having to fine tune my own radar and be really conscious about, oh yeah, I'm asking for the, like, let's go deep all the time. And not everybody will want to do that with me.
So how does she send out the not right now signal to you?
Oh my goodness, there's so many ways. I think she's listening right now too, but I'll do like a little performance art. What? You know, it's sort of the monosyllables, like, I'm doing something, you know.
I'm busy.
Yeah. And you know, there's, even in the Zoom environment, I'm picking up on those cues in a new way. And I'd encourage other people to start to notice this too. It's like, if you have a 7 friend, notice if your 7 friend starts to be distracted by everything else going on outside of the call. That's a hint that the call's probably over.
That's a great point.
And that the 7 has probably moved on to something else.
Sure.
Right? The 2 might most likely stay on the call with you as long as you continue to go, even if that is not what,
even if they're ready to be done.
Right? So remembering, you know, as a 4, I have 2 very, very dear 2 friends, and I have had to really start to learn in a way that in person I can pick it up a lot quicker. But I really started to look at, are you done with this conversation? Is our connection good for now? And we can both move on from this. And that's, I think, something that's really important to this conversation that I hadn't quite sparked on, was the quality of connection. How we may have to learn new ways to get clear about that we haven't had to really do in the same way, or some of us haven't done in the same way.
Sure. Yeah, I that's a really great point, because I'm thinking about it now. I can only do, as an introvert, I can only do, you know, so many FaceTimes or Zoom calls in a week. But that doesn't mean that I'm not thinking of the person that I'm going to talk to on Wednesday every day leading up to the call. So I start just like gathering, like I'll start a little note in my phone of things that I want to bring up with them when I get the chance to talk to them. Which is interesting, because in the past, I probably would have just sent a text the moment that I thought of it. But yes, because I know I have this scheduled time that I'm going to talk to this person, it's more like, okay, I'm gathering these things because I really do want to see their facial expressions. I want to see how they relate to and interact with me. I want to see their face, you know?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I am so interested in is how loneliness has changed in this time. And I don't know why, but something about how you were talking about, like, gathering information so that you could really relish that. There was something really tender about what you were saying. And it made me think about the people for whom connection isn't happening as consciously or often, or that there's fewer opportunities for that.
Right.
And there's a formal clinical definition of loneliness, which is the perception of social isolation.
Right. I remember you saying that in your talk, and I was like, that was a light bulb moment for me too.
Right. So even if someone is sharing a home, or, you know, has people in their environment, or is busy work-wise or some other reason through digital connection, a person might still be feeling lonely because they're perceiving themselves as isolated in some way. And it might be that the quality of the connection isn't clicking.
Sure. And I think quality is harder to come by now. And so there does have to be this intentionality. When you mentioned the word tender, I do feel like there is a tenderness rising to the surface for me, because it feels so important every day to actively show the people that I care about that I do. There may be a little bit of insecurity there about, oh, I don't want them to forget about me. But I do think most of it comes from a place of life feels really precious. We have sort of left this, the comfortability of normalcy that we had previously. And it feels pressing to me to engage with the people that I care about in ways that require more work up front from me. And I'm actually finding that I take a lot of excitement from putting more intentionality into those conversations and those connections.
Mm-hmm. What type of advice, right? Such a loaded word.
Right.
What's your take, or how would you support someone who was having that experience of feeling that type of loneliness?
Oof.
And you're walking in so many different worlds. I think that's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of different spaces that I navigate. I know that I have friends that I have made online that live lonely lives because they'll talk about it. I think for me, again, it's very important to me to be careful about how much I take on that labor because I have a history of codependency. I tend to get too connected to people too quickly, which I believe is a trauma response. But wow, I would recommend, if advice is helpful here, I think waiting for someone to reach out to you is probably just going to cause you more suffering. And I don't think that you should reach out to people indiscriminately just out of desperation. I would make a very short list of a couple of people that are the first people that you want to tell about your sadness or your joy, and then just find ways to really reach out to them. I know for me, I'm rather new to, I live in Sacramento, California. And when I moved here, I had my partners, but I didn't know anyone else. I didn't have any longstanding friendships. And I had experienced some pretty significant loss around that recently. And I just didn't put myself out there to connect with people here because, well, for a variety of my own insecurities and stuff. So since the pandemic hit, I have realized, wow, there are about 3 or 4 people that I really miss being able to see. I want to have them be a part of my life. So how am I going to take the initiative to show them that? And I think for me, that has been healing, because regardless of whether or not they reciprocate in the ways that I wish they would, I am taking action to meet that need for myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a critical thing that you just talked about right there, taking action for yourself.
Yep, right.
Right. And getting really clear through the lens of the Enneagram about what communication styles work. Some people are more comfortable doing an outreach by text. Some people are phone callers. Some people are video callers.
Right.
Some people thrive in social media platforms, right? Like getting clear about that and knowing that you can work true to type. There doesn't have to be some expectation that it has to look some other way. Start with where you are and your own strengths. Seems really critical too in this like the tension between wanting to reach out, feeling isolated,
right,
and that stuck point that can get brought up in that.
Absolutely. And I think too, when we talk about type, I think it's important to realize that you have certain friends who are going to respond. They're going to respond to different kinds of outreach. So I know I have one friend who she's very verbal. She's always, just outpouring lots of heartfelt thoughts and feelings. So I know that I can lavish that attention on her and she will receive it in kind. But I have another friend who's a 5, and when they are in person with you, they are absolutely there. They are on point. They are listening actively. They're thinking of wonderful questions to ask you, but they probably aren't going to respond to your text. So if I just deluge them with love and affection via text message and they don't respond, well, that's kind of me not paying attention to their communication style rather than some slight towards me. So I think just getting increasingly aware of what does this person, and I've had recently a lot of very the kind of friendship conversations that just feel weird to have as an adult, but I don't think they should. I had a conversation with a friend the other day where I said, I feel weird sending a long text message about, what a bad day I had or how I'm struggling, because I'm worried that I'm going to be dumping on you. And since I'm not going to see you in person, it feels weird to just text this long book of information. And so we had a very active boundary conversation where she said, thank you so much for saying that. I think, a check-in before you send a long thing like that might be good. I'll always let you know if I have the time and the space to answer you, or I will say, I'll read it and I'll let you know I'm going to respond tomorrow. And so we just had this very kind of detailed communication interaction where we figured out how we could do that with one another while not being able to see each other.
Right. It's that whole, it's the whole premise of, I may need to have conversations that I never thought to have before, because there's just no taking for granted that there'll be another time to do it.
Right.
There might not.
I do think it's bringing boundaries, the conversations around boundaries to the forefront, which I think is good for all of us.
Yeah. And I was at a conference last week and we were talking about how it was a great conference. It was all about expressive arts therapy and education, and it's really
fun.
juicy. I know. And there were so many people on this Zoom call. And one of the things that came up was sort of this story about how, back in the day, we all envisioned that we would have video call, right? George Jetson.
Right.
This. So there was this idea of oh, someday in the future we'll have this. But I don't think that those dreams were to the exclusion of in-person connection. And so something that I'm noticing in my personal experience, but I'm also hearing from other people, is that grief is really strong for people around the pandemic and around the disconnection. And grief has also really started to be talked about in terms of our social engagements as a nation divided. And so there's all this collective grief for a lot of different reasons. And it's with the pandemic, it's been so sudden. Right. And with talks and conversations about racism in this country, it's historical. So it's like these two forms of grief colliding. And a lot of us also don't really know how to do grief. And we're just kind of, we all are back to work and grin and bear it and putting on these ways of setting aside the time of grieving in order to keep going. And I just think that the impact of that has had an impact on our ability to connect too.
And we may not know how to hold space for that particular kind of grief unless it's named in the way that you just did. Like, oh, wow, yes, my life did change drastically, and the way that I seek connection just changed drastically, and that deserves space.
A beat, maybe?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And how we connect in times of grief. I think people do it so differently, and some people have sort of lifelong grief, some people have intergenerational grief. There's all kinds of it, but
Right.
it's a wake in a way that seems new for many people too, and I don't know that we have the tools, or that I'm saying that so universally,
Right.
and I don't even mean it universally. It's more of a, when it pops up for individuals as they're noticing, I don't know how to hold this.
Right.
It's a resourcing question in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I, even as you're saying that, I'm thinking too, so for me, as you know, as a survivor of, I have in the past on Twitter talked a lot about religious trauma, sexual trauma. You know, I have made a lot of connections with people online that have turned out to kind of be trauma bonds, because we shared similar experiences, and we were coming out of this, you know, horrific ordeal, but we didn't really have the same values and ethics as one another, but we connected so deeply because we had this shared pain. And what I'm noticing a lot now is, even as you mentioned grief, we have this shared grief of the pandemic. And then also we are being asked, and we have to ask ourselves to hold space for grief that is very foreign to us. So especially for us as white folks, we are seeing this outpouring of very understandable pain from Black folks and people of color, and just we don't know that grief. And so when you say we don't know how to hold it, we're experiencing two very significant kinds. That's a shared grief, and then there's a foreign grief, and we're asking ourselves to expand, to hold space for both of those.
Yeah.
And that does require resources that we have not probably previously amassed.
Yeah. And I'm really influenced by relational cultural theory, or the idea that we grow in connection, that we aren't these isolated selves.
Right.
And that as a resource is so powerful. But if we're not cultivating relationship, we don't have the tools, we don't have the ability to really tap into the connection as a form of really finding one another, but also finding our own groundedness.
Yeah.
Or finding that place to feel healing. And this is kind of leading me into a thought bubble.
Okay.
Right here. So how do we do all of this? How do we do connection? What tips might we each offer? If you were to offer like two really great things that have really worked for you, let's say in the past 3 months. What's worked for you?
So I've actually joined a couple of groups that have happened rather organically online around common goals. So so I live in Sacramento. There was a local Black yoga instructor here who said, you know, where are the white people who are speaking up about this in my city? And so a bunch of us reached out, we direct messaged her, and then she said, great, give me your emails, let's all get on a Zoom call. And all of a sudden, now I'm a part of this group that I was not even expecting to join, but it's, you know, full of people with a bunch of different skills that are different from my own, who are also working virtually to continue the work of anti-racism in our city. I joined another one. A lot of this has happened through Instagram. I follow people that are talking about things that I care about, and then I continue following them. And another one, I joined a class that one of my favorite follows on Instagram said, I'm going to teach an 8-week class on trauma and intimacy if you'd like to join. And I said, I got nothing but time, sign me up. And so I've joined a couple of different groups like that, where I'm connecting with people that are not just random follows on Twitter or Instagram, but they're people that we're connected by a common interest, and we are interested in learning together and expanding together. So that has been something super practical that I've been doing. And it has happened organically, but it is definitely because of the specific things that I'm seeking to learn about. I seek to live my life as a lifelong learner. So I never feel like I've arrived at anything. And especially, being out of actual school, I've trying to connect with people who are doing similar research as myself. So that might be kind of niche. I'm trying to think, how have you been connecting with others in new ways online?
So it's such a great question. I feel so fortunate that I am a lifelong person living in education as part of the CIIS community. So connection is through that community is so, it's an ongoing experience for me that I feel really privileged to have and gifted to have. So that's a workplace form of connection. And so for some people, if they're working, what might be some novel ways I ask myself this question and talk to my clients a lot about this, how to create some more fulfilling or more bondy type of work conversations in this type of environment. I often work with a lot of people in management, and I'm hearing things like, we can't just have meetings. We've got to build in, we've got to build in, right. It's like, you can't just like dive right into the meeting. There needs to be some even more focused attention in workplaces for the human connection part, because things are so artificial. And a lot of people don't know how to work remotely because they've been in office culture for so long. And so, in terms of the workplace, it's like, let's all take it to the next level of really remembering that we are human beings in bodies that attune to one another, literally, and that we need to do that part, that's not just a formality or a nicety, it's a necessity.
It's not just small talk.
Exactly. It's not, makes us human beings to one another. So like, if you are in a workplace, one recommendation might be, talk to your manager about creating a little more opportunity for that, or, find some of your teammates that feel, that you would rely on in that way in the work environment, and make time for that. That's part of how we bond at work. And then in like social life, I have two thoughts about this.
Okay.
One is, I think it's more important than ever to have alone time, like good, solid, healthy alone time, not checkout time, not numbing time, not avoiding time.
That distinction is important.
Yes, absolutely. Because, Netflix and I have developed an even stronger relationship during the pandemic. I won't lie. But, this way of like giving yourself some time to really feel your feelings, take a breath, really appreciate yourself. So that when you are reaching back out for connection, you're bringing with you that energy. That's a really important piece, I think.
So I've created, and my partners will laugh, but I've created sort of a weekly ritual where I will have date night with myself. And in the past, I would have left the house. I don't do that anymore, but I just, I take the opportunity to be a little bit selfish, and it's hard in a family with 6 people, but I just say, hey, listen, Monday night, I need the living room, and I'm going to camp out. I'm going to read a book that I've been really excited to read, and I'm going to read it in silence, or I'm going to watch a movie, just me and myself, or I've created like a little altar space where I'll burn incense and just kind of like center myself very intentionally, because since I do live in a house with a lot of people, alone time is harder to come by, and I've had to get so much more creative. Right now we are in my quarantine office, which is literally the only room in the house that had a little bit of extra space was the bathroom. Strangely, there's a lot of floor space. So I bought a tiny little desk and created my little office in here. And, but yeah, it's required a creativity that it didn't require before.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that alone time is about renewal so that connections can be fresh.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one thing that I think is super important. And I say that for myself as much as for anyone else.
Right.
You know, circling back to the Enneagram, type 4s often, as I know you know, have a bit of a tendency to withdraw for a variety of different reasons. And there's a way in which the life of the mind is so active and so busy. There's a lot of fantasy that goes on. You know, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, thinking about everything about except what is.
All of those conversations that I would have had given the opportunity.
Exactly, right. And so that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking more about it doesn't have to be even like a specified practice. I love what you're saying about date night with yourself, like getting creative with this. Mine is walking.
Yeah.
I'm doing 5 miles a day right now. And I'm
Whoa.
like,
amazing.
To me, that is the renewal. That is the place where my brain, after work, my brain gets to recalibrate, my nervous system gets to recalibrate, and all of a sudden I'm ready for re-engagement.
Yeah.
And so self-care isn't just like a cheap one-off. It's really about making sure that I feel like I'm in my skin, so that when I'm connecting with other people, I'm not like, I'm so hungry for attention. So that's one thing. And I know that a lot of people are quarantining alone. And so that tension around too much alone time, I think, can be really legit as well.
Yeah.
And can be kind of brutal. And so in terms of connecting from that perspective, calendaring things in seems like a really important part too. Scheduling time for connection.
Yeah.
And if it's feeling like there aren't a lot of deep connections, or there aren't enough to fill your card, I love your idea about classes. In my mind, I would even imagine that, you know, some of the big, like they used to be called MOOCs back in the day, you know, the giant classes of like 1,000 people all at once, that may not fulfill the need so much. So finding like a class that's being offered locally, or a class that, you know, here in St. Pete, we have these amazing arts communities and social communities and activist communities, and they're starting to really use the online space for smaller group connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think for any of the Enneagram types, like really being able to show up and be in conversation in those environments can be really helpful and really nurturing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important to, for me, when it comes to the Enneagram, like we may not have time to get into all of it, but the childhood wounds to me are really important because they're recurring themes that come up for the different numbers. And again, it seems really important to notice. Maybe even your mind isn't consciously thinking about that need, but your body may be showing you in different ways if you pay attention.
Will you give just like a blip of how you view the childhood wound idea?
Yes.
Like, how do you work with it?
So for me, I try, and that a lot of teachers maybe will not agree with this, but as someone who is a trauma researcher, it's really important to me that, so some Enneagram teachers will say the childhood wounds are not real wounds, they're perceived. Some will say they are actual indications of childhood trauma. My thought is a wound, either whether or not it was meant to be a wound or it's simply perceived, feels the same in my body. So whether it was intentional or not seems almost beside the point. So what I imagine, like a little child asking a question. So for all of the different parts, the question example for type 1 is, am I good? The type 2 is, am I needed? The one for 3 would be, am I valuable? The one for 4 would be, am I special? The one for 5 would be, do I know enough? The one for 6 would be, am I safe? I can keep going, but I just imagine
like, we probably have some 7, 8s, and 9s out there.
Yes, so that's true. That's true. Okay. I haven't thought of the question for 7 specifically, but there's a fear of not having enough experiences, not having enough data. Let me think on that one. I'll come back to it. For the 8s, the question is, well, I think the question for 8s can be a couple of different things, because 8s are often, they experience some kind of major betrayal as a child. So there is that, am I safe question, but there also is this, I imagine a little child like protect smaller one. Like I have this charge that I have to protect.
Right.
So
do I feel protected, or do I feel like I have
the resources to protect myself? And then for the 9s, can I be calm? Can I be balanced? And I think 9 children, we always see like trying to find that equilibrium, and maybe they can't necessarily in a chaotic household, or often I've described the 9 as kind of the middle child syndrome, although I have been corrected by that in the past, because there are a lot of 9s who are oldest or 9s who are youngest, but there's this sense of being forgotten. So maybe that the question for a 9 would be, am I forgotten? And then maybe for the 7s, coming back to that would be, I don't want to be afraid. Can I outrun this? So there's this sort of sense of keep moving, keep ahead of the fear, keep ahead of whatever might be, whatever you might be afraid of. Don't pay attention to the fear. The 6s will focus in on the fear, and the 7s will kind of say, I can stay ahead of this if I keep going.
Right. And how might those childhood wounds be driving or keeping people from connection?
I think that's a question that each of us have to ask ourselves, because I think it shows up very uniquely for all of us. I know for me, am I special? Am I unique? I know for me, I have been kind of in a time of turmoil vocationally. And so there's sort of been this sense of, I'm just another person sitting at home. I'm nothing special, and so it has made me feel a little, the reality of pandemic means that I can't be out in the world displaying or performing my specialness or uniqueness, or my deepness. Although there is kind of a way to do that online. And so I'm trying to find ways to be vulnerable with my close friends and online, but not in ways that are, well, we all need attention. So I struggle to even use the word attention seeking because I don't want that to sound negative. But the point is, am I displaying words and behavior and art and writing? Is this in line with my true self? Or am I just putting it out there so that I can get likes and comments and, engagement and attention? So I think the kind or the quality of the attention there maybe is important to know.
And this is our time to segue into some questions. I pulled up the questions from people who are watching. And is it okay with you if I just read them out and
absolutely.
We dive in? Okay. So Larkspur Morton has asked, any advice on how best to enter back into the higher level of social expectations? I've been grateful for the decrease of social obligation. I don't think, Larkspur, that you are alone.
I don't either. I think we have the opportunity right now to just be really honest with one another about that. I think some of the politeness of our American culture has maybe made way for some fresh honesty and vulnerability where we can just say, hey, I'm for that. And hopefully you are in connection with people who care about your capacity and aren't going to guilt you or shame you for not being able to show up to every party or there probably aren't parties happening, but I just think being clear about that, people can't really fault you for speaking your truth. They can, but then that kind of shows where they're at.
Yeah. And I think too, that this is a chance to really reconsider the social capital of busyness. And that busyness had literally become a status.
Yes.
And that it's reflected in social media and it's reflected. How many conversations pre-pandemic did you have? I'll speak from my own experience and from my own reality of how I used to express myself. About 3 years ago, I noticed that when people would ask me how I was, I would do that social thing of, oh, I'm so busy. There's so much going on, blah, 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 blah,
right.
blah. And then I moved to Florida and my life got real busy, run real fast because I'm new to an area.
Right.
And I've experienced FOMO. I will admit, I am a girl who knows a deep FOMO in my life. And reframing from that or stepping back and saying, is busy really how I want people to perceive me? Because I realized that in my experience, it was making me seem somewhat inaccessible.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is the last thing I want personally.
Right.
So I think it's an opportunity for us too to really get clear about how busyness gets used as a form of disconnection or as a form of, being able to say no in the way that maybe you're suggesting, instead of just being like, that's not where I'm at today. I'll catch you later.
Right.
So I love that we're both kind of on this wavelength of, well, it might have looked one way before, but maybe it's an opportunity now to just get a little clearer about priorities.
Yeah, maybe you get to restructure your social life going forward in a way that fits you better than the expectations that you're experiencing pre-pandemic.
Right.
I love that for me.
I love it for me too. Okay, next question. Jason asks, do you have any advice for dating and new romance in the time of shelter in place?
Oh, God.
I am partnered, so I am not dating currently. But I have heard some very unusual stories about, once again, trying to use virtual space to get to know someone in the challenge of trying to vibe in that way that romance is all about, can be really challenging.
Yeah, I saw a whole I saw a whole saga that I think was originally posted to TikTok, but this boy in New York was on his rooftop and he saw this neighbor girl on her rooftop, and he was like finding creative ways to send her messages, and it was actually really cute. But I do think that it requires I mean, I have always been a writer, so I've always loved, almost to a fault, like the long distance relationship building, because you can write all of your thoughts and you have time to sort of like read over them before you send, to make sure like that's really what you wanted to say. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it kind of takes out like the awkwardness of a first date a little bit, because you're not, anxious and sweating and tripping all over yourself.
Mm-hmm. And it also, I've seen a lot of people in the medical professions and in public health professions. This is getting a little sciencey, but I'm getting somewhere with it, I promise.
We love science.
We're having to look at this virus as something that gets transmitted, mm-hmm. particularly when people are in close proximity. Right. And dating tends to lead, if it's going well,
right,
to proximity.
Yeah.
And so similar, not in any way the same, but similar to some of the negotiating strategies that had to really be learned when HIV was first being learned about, and how
interesting. Yeah.
Transmitted. There's new recommendations about the types of conversations in terms of social contact that needs to be negotiated in dating as well, in terms of, are you, more of a full-time quarantiner? Are you a first responder? Are you part of the protest movements? So when you're getting to know someone, there's a level of questions about behavior that we probably would never have asked a couple months ago. Or if we did, in the dating scenario, it might be seen as like, whoa, this person like
coming on a little strong. Yeah.
Strong, like, so candor and more information gathering seems to be a really important component that it changes the scope of how we think about intimacy.
Yeah.
In a different way. And, what about the third date?
Right.
Who's having a third date these days in the same way that used to mean something different?
Right.
What does physical touch look like? How do we learn whether we're compatible with someone? How do we negotiate sex with someone that we're just developing a relationship with? Yeah. These are all questions that I think it's going to really take some time to figure out. I think we don't know how to do this, really.
Right. Well, and I've seen a few, like, I had a sweet friend on Twitter who, she had just started dating somebody right before quarantine started, and she was immunocompromised, so she couldn't leave the house, and she couldn't see the person that she had just started dating because, they were separated. And so, after a couple months of that, they decided, we feel like we're really into this. Let's move in together. And they did. And obviously that can't work, especially if you're casual dating. That's not probably the best case scenario, but I do think it's going to look drastic on a case by case basis. Like you said, if both people are full-time quarantiners, if one person is going out and leaving the house, if one is, working from home, right. You're going to have to make those decisions actively together earlier on.
Right. And if there's an in-person date to be had, are you both willing to do 2 weeks of quarantine? And what parameters? And, and in a way, like, isn't that sort of romantic in the sense of like the anticipation that can build?
I think that the pandemic is taking away a lot of our social expectations in ways that can that can feel scary and can feel exciting and romantic, just because it's new. And
Right.
we're navigating this in real time.
Right. And sometimes it takes that mind shift for yourself of saying, oh, I could look at this as a real problem. I could look at this as a hurdle. What if I look at this as something romantic or something like an opportunity? What's another
Exciting.
way to
It
look
could be
at
an adventure. Yeah.
it? Right. We have another question.
Okay.
Alice has a comment and then a question. Thank you for talking about not only the importance of holding shared grief, but the importance for white people of holding the grief of Black people when this is wanted. So they're
right.
really noting that. And she's asking, do we have suggestions for how to do this, how to hold this grief, both the shared grief as well as the grief of others in a way that we don't maybe live in our own lives?
Right. I definitely think it looks different for me on a daily basis. I will say, a couple as an empath, I can either be absolutely destroyed by grief, or the healthier that I get, the more that I feel like one of my offerings that I have to give the world is as a grief holder. Like, I can hold space for that pain in ways that other people maybe wouldn't or would avoid. So one of the ways that I've engaged is, Black folks, and especially Black women, are being absolutely inundated right now with white people, very, for the most part, very wanting to learn, wanting to be educated, but the communal grief that Black folks are experiencing is so significant, and they are being exhausted by those requests for emotional labor and education. Right. So as a white person, I think we get the chance to kind of collect our own and be like, hey, I hear that you are wanting to show up to the anti-racism conversation. So let me bring you over here. You don't need to ask the people who are grieving to tell you more about their pain or perform that pain for you. But your questions are important. So let's gather together. Let's gather resources. Let's gather book lists. Let's put together content that can educate white people about what Black people in America are experiencing. And the
origins of the grief.
Yes. The
history. Right. Exactly.
The history, the writing that has, the writing and the speaking and the essays and all of that wonderful work that has been I think we all have been raised in echo chambers on some level. So, I knew that Angela Davis was a person, but I had never read a single word she said, just things like that, where we have not been given that information, and it is our job to educate ourselves now. I was reading through the stories of people who had died at the hands of police, and I came across the name of a woman that I had never heard of before, and I felt kind of surprised that I had never heard her name. And so I looked up her story and was very touched, and I just thought, wow, I want more people to say her name. I want more people to know her story. I'm not an artist, but I have a friend who is, so I commissioned her to do a painting of this woman who died, just to kind of continue to expand the white people around me, their knowledge of, and the girl who I commissioned the art piece from said, wow, I've never heard her story either. I'm going to read up on it before I paint this painting, because I want it to be filled with energy and intentionality. So I think that I just keep coming back to creativity. I mean, on a daily basis, I wake up and I say, what can I do today? And sometimes that means digging into my book list and educating myself. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations with family members. Sometimes that means teaching the people around me the names of those who have died that I had just heard for the first time. So, yeah, I think as long as we are trying to keep that work away from asking more of Black people right now is important.
Right. And what you're touching on is something that I'm seeing a lot of, hearing a lot of in conversation about is, and I believe this because I was taught by second wave feminists. I am of the generation of when third wave feminism happened. But Carol Hannah said the personal is political in 1970. And right now, I think a suggestion that I feel very strongly about is doing inner work to get really clear, so that when I'm engaged in connection and when I'm engaged in the outer work, that I know where I am in it, and I can be really honoring of the process that someone else is having.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is where the personal is political takes on
right.
Newfound vigor for me personally.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. What I've been doing lately is digging through my own personal history, because I was not raised in a family that would in any way have ever said anything explicitly racist. But what, I was homeschooled for much of that time. So what topics did we not learn about in, 7th, 9th, 10th grade history? What did what were the omissions that, I went into grad school being of the opinion that racism ended with the civil rights movement. So, there was never anything explicitly racist said in my house, and yet the omission of my knowledge and my understanding and my empathic ability to hold space for the racism that's so very prevalent in our country today, or even the idea that it could be systemic, that maybe it isn't just, white people saying mean things or doing bad things, but that there's this whole structure around how racism shows up in America today. So, yes, that self-education is important.
Yeah. And this is where I love the Enneagram too. And how I have spent a lot of time teaching the Enneagram is that it's a way to get clear about things aren't always happening to us. Things are on the individual level. I'm going really individual here, right? That the Enneagram is a way to also look at how we may be personalizing things that aren't ours to personalize.
Right.
And some things are personal. Like, I'm not saying it's universal, but it's that lens of saying, I'll use fours as an example because that's what I know the most. Fours have a very difficult relationship with shame. And there's a lot of shame that can erupt for people who identify or pass as white.
Right.
And so there's a real tendency to not want to look, and getting really clear about what's personal, but also what am I amplifying as personal that is being done to me that's not. That is about other people's lived experiences from their own unique position. And that's a space for growth and a space for awareness that can shift
absolutely
how I show up in the world.
And what I've noticed for myself as a 4 is that shame often results in me unintentionally centering myself. So I find out that I've done something wrong, I've caused harm in some way, and I just absolutely spiral and I feel horrible and I'm weeping and I'm just, making a whole production of self-flagellating about it. And I've had dear friends and my partner tell me, hey, when you do that, that self-flagellation is not helping me. It's not doing any repair work around the actual harm caused. It's just unintentionally, perhaps, centering yourself. And now I have to make you feel better when I was the one telling you about the harm that you caused me.
Disconnection.
So, right.
Yeah.
Right.
We have a couple of type-based questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to segue for a sec.
Okay.
Maya is a 2, and she says, I spend so much energy trying to understand and support others. What suggestions do you have for connecting with myself, especially when I don't have a desire to, but I know it's important?
I run into this with 2 so much because they know that connecting with themselves is important, but the desire may not be there. And I think this is a place where curiosity and play can really come in handy. So maybe a whole date night to yourself sounds exhausting. But what if you think about something that you've always wanted to do, or some kind of, for me recently, it was, I just kind of want a collage. I haven't had anything like physically, anything tangible, artistic to do in a long time. And I just want to cut some stuff out of magazines and make, goofy little art things by myself. Mm-hmm. So maybe just sort of, I think we all, if we have the childhood wound, we definitely have probably multiple inner children asking for things that they would like to do. So maybe, and maybe it's not something where you make this huge commitment to, 1 hour a day I'm going to spend on my own if that feels exhausting, but just, I'm going to do this right now for 15 minutes. I'm going to take myself on this nature walk, or, whatever that may be for you. I think when we force things like this, then it just turns into a task or a duty, and then you're not actually connecting with yourself anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes in my experience of working with 2s and having 2s in my life, I've noticed that oftentimes there's like a resistance to doing it alone, doing reflecting on the self alone. So I also sometimes recommend, like, do you have a trusted friend? Maybe not an intimate. This is maybe one of those times of like not doing this in your romantic relationship. But like a trusted friend or somebody that is on your team where you can spend 15 or 20 minutes on some kind of call, phone call or a Zoom call, where the attention gets focused back on the 2. Mm-hmm. Where it's an opportunity for someone to reflect back to the 2. This is what I love about you. This is what I find fun about you. These are, when we're doing this kind of thing, it gets me so, I feel so much joy. So like 2s are very, very good at compliments. So it's almost like a reverse compliment process. And just to see if it's even tolerable, instead of trying to do it for yourself, see if you can tolerate receiving from someone else.
Oh, I like that.
That kind of praise, so that you can get used to it. And it may take
ease yourself in.
Exactly. And it may take some repeated effort of, oh, wow, this person actually is saying this to me. I'm going to need to hear that again.
Right.
Because there's such an other focused tendency that to restructure the focus back in can be really challenging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you even think about the 2 childhood question of, am I needed? Even that is it's an outward focused question.
Exactly. So Maya, phone a friend on this.
And let them know what it is that you're asking for in advance. Like,
exactly.
Over communicate about it if necessary.
Exactly. Like, set it up as an intentional date. And Maya, I would even invite you, if you feel up to it, write the questions that you would like answered. Like write an interview protocol so that you can feel a little bit like you're in control of it too, you know, and that you can kind of hear what you want to hear in that first one, and then maybe see where it goes from there.
I like that.
We have one more question. I think we have time for one more.
Okay,
right?
one more.
Okay. Any advice about how to connect when in grief? I'm a type 7, tend to isolate when grieving, partly because I don't feel that others can really support me, not needing something from someone, not need something from me.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I have experienced a lot of 7s who often feel like because they are so interesting and exciting and they bring life and vivacity to a space, that's what people start to expect from them.
Right.
That's a really good question. I want to think about it for 1 second.
I've got one thought as you're thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
This can feel uncomfortable, but it can be helpful, is to slow down. 7s, like most head types, are very, very quick of thought. Things are very fast. Things move very quickly. And grief tends to have its own pace and its own clock, and it tends to not be quick. So tuning in to slowing down a little bit might feel very unusual and decentering, but might also help recalibrate some of the feelings that are coming up, or giving them a little bit of space. And maybe doing that solo as well as in connection with other people might be helpful.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of a dear 7 friend who, when she was sad, she would close herself in her room for multiple days. She was my roommate for a while. And it was so the opposite of everything that I'd ever experienced with her, that I just I thought, oh, well, she doesn't want anybody to bother her. She wants to be left alone.
Right.
But I wonder now, in retrospect, if just a gentle check-in, or, you know, a lot of times she would work on projects a lot when she was sad. So maybe, you know, maybe we don't have to talk, but maybe we can be in the same room working on a project together. And then, you know, if organically conversation comes up, it can, and it doesn't have to. There's no pressure. But it does require there to be somebody who is in relationship with them, who's intuitive and engaged in that way. That can be challenging to find.
Yeah, and it might be something that, to learn how to ask for that. You know, like you said, oftentimes 7s train the people around them to be at their speed. And to be in that space, because that's the space that everyone gets used to.
Right.
Being, right. So if there's a need for something different or some support, you know, maybe some of the language around it could be something like, I'm not at my usual speedy self right now.
Right.
And I need things to slow, like I need our conversation to slow down a little bit, because I'm not in my typical space. So can we do that?
Right.
And that can cue other people to, I can't do what you expect of me, or what you think I'm going to do, to reframe the setting.
That expectation.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So we are at the close of our time together today, and this is our chance to invite Jason back in. And I just want to thank you so much, Hannah. This has just been such a treat.
I've loved every minute of it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was so wonderful and just relevant to these times. And I learned a lot about being a 9 and how I do a really good job of not dealing with things and think I'm dealing with it. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Absolutely.
Okay, take care.
And thank you all so much for attending tonight. We hope that you will join us for more of our upcoming events. Our next event will be Human Health and Ecological Resilience, an online conversation with Natalie Metz and Elizabeth Allison on June 18 at 7 p.m. U.S. Pacific Time. We have posted the link in the chat if you want to learn more. This conversation was recorded tonight. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, it can be found on the same link on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and good night.